Good morning, everyone. My name is Athanasios Pozantzis, a.k.a. Noseman, and I work with Maxon on education. I make tutorials for university and provide solutions for users when they request them. Back in October of 2020, I was sent a workstation from Dell, a 3640 Precision with an RTX 5000, 64 gigs of system RAM, and a Xeon processor. I think the plan was they knew that I was a very dedicated Mac user, and they wanted to convince me that PCs are not as bad as we Mac people think they are. I have to say that I was pleasantly surprised by this machine because, number one, it's not blingy. It doesn't have any flashing lights or LED stuff like that, which totally irritates me. Ignore the stuff on the back, that's for sure. And it's very quiet. I have it right next to me right now. It's working, and I can't hear it at all. It's extremely reliable. I've turned it off maybe a handful of times since October, and now it's April 2021, because I have it rendering all the time in the background, because I'm testing the GPU and Redshift tests and all that. Anyhow, fast forward a few weeks ago, I was asked by Dell if I can do a half-an-hour presentation and use it in real time, create a project in 30 minutes. So I sat down and I created this, which we are going to recreate from an empty project today. And the only thing we're not going to do is render the final one, which took around 25 minutes to render at HD quality. And the only thing I added on top is some color correction, nothing else. So let's dive into the project. We will begin by using a simple spline that represents the Dell logo, and it's just a simple spline I imported from Adobe Illustrator. Now, first of all, let's go and add some depth to that. But before I do that, I can see that it's 723 centimeters approximately in width. I want to make it much bigger. It works better for my setup. And I'm going to go to the Edit and use the Scale Project command. And this says, what is your current scale and what's a target scale? I'm going to just set the target to 20 to make it 20 times bigger. Press OK, and there it is. Press H to frame your view. Now let's go and add our extrude object. Let's make this a child of it and select it. And I'm going to go to the object, set this to Z, and let's turn on eyeglaw shading lines. Now, if you go over here, what you will see is that because the spline has a default adaptive mode in the intermediate points, I only get subdivisions where I have curvature and no subdivision where I have straight lines. And that's very good if you want optimized generated meshes. It's not good if you want to do deformations. You're going to have problems. So we will solve this by changing the intermediate points into subdivided and use an angle of 5, which is going to determine the subdivision on the curves, and a distance of 50 centimeters, which is going to define the subdivision on the straight lines. And that looks good enough. Now, if you go to the extrude, you will see that in the caps, we have cap type of N-gon. Again, this is going to cause a problem with deformation. So go and change it to regular grid, make it quad dominant, and let's make this 50, press enter, and you will see now that we have enough subdivisions that will allow us to do a good deformation without any problem. The last thing I'm going to do for the model is to go to the extrude in the caps tab and set the size to something like 20, so we get a bit of rounding over here. Makes it look a bit better. And let's just name this now Dell model. Excellent. And the model is ready. Press H, and we have our model framed in here. It's time to create our deformation animation. And first of all, I'm going to go and set the duration of my animation to 150 frames. And I'm going to go and set up a camera. Let's name it main camera. And let's go and activate it. And I'm going to go and zero out the coordinates and the rotations, except for the Z. And let me use the camera composition helpers. I'm going to turn on the grid. And this gives me this grid, which I can customize over here with how many cells and all that, in order to place whatever I'm placing in my screen nicely. Now, one of the problems with typography is that each letter can have the same width or an approximate width, but its volume is different. So the D occupies a bigger area, whereas the L is kind of empty, mostly empty. So this makes the logo seem that it's a bit to the left. So I can do certain things. For example, I can take the logo and move it a bit so that visually we have a balance. And that's pretty much all you have to do, just to make sure that it looks visually pleasing. And I'm pretty sure you artists know how to do this better than I do. So select the camera again, let's turn off the helpers, and we're good to go. This is going to be the final placement of our camera. Now, back to the deformations. Let me deactivate the camera. I don't want to move it by mistake, and then just navigate using my default camera. I'm going to create 2 bend deformers. So first of all, let me fold this, and let me go and create a null, which is at the center of the world. And I'm going to put it here, call it Dell, F for deformed. I'm going to put this here, and then I'm going to create a bend deformer. Now it's quite small, so just go to the scale tool and click and drag a few times to make it slightly bigger. Now what I want to do before I apply it, and this helps a lot of people deal with deformers, and sometimes you get weird results if you make this a child of the null, a sibling of the deformer, and do this, you get these deformations, and sometimes it's a bit confusing how to set it up so it deforms properly. And for that reason, what I do is I take it out of the hierarchy and I try to make it look like the surface I'm trying to deform. So you can see that the x-axis, which is the red one, is the one we want to make it thinner. So I'm going to make this, let's say, 120, which is slightly thicker than our object, or even 150. It doesn't really make a difference. And now you can see, obviously, that if I want to take this and make it into a half pipe, I need to rotate this so that it complies with what I'm trying to do. There you go. So just rotate it and eyeball it, and then go down to the coordinates and set this to the closest 90 degree. That's minus 90. Fantastic. And now what I can do is make it a child, and you'll see we get half the deformation. Now there's a nice little trick you can do, is set the mode to unlimited. And this is going to apply the deformation on the whole object, not just the portion which is above, which is the default case. Now, you can see the green axis. So if we go here and set the y, which is the green, to something, let's say 3000. And because it's 3000, if I raise it half that, so 3000 divided by 2, I know it's 1500, but I'm just doing it. You can see that it falls exactly at our floor line, so that when we deform this, it will deform equally at the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to give it this little shape here, and you can see that we get a nice deformation, and everything works nicely. So the next thing I'm going to do is take this, press Command or Control to make a copy, because now I want to do a secondary deformation around. And again, I'm going to rotate it to comply to what I'm trying to do, and this is 90 degrees that away. Fantastic. And if I go to apply it now, you will see that we get this result. I'm just going to move it to the left. You can see what's going on here. I need to bring it right in the middle. So Y, selected, 3000, go to the Y, make it half, minus 1500. Excellent. And then just go and relax it a bit so we avoid any overlaps. And I think that this is what I'm looking at this point. And there you have it. We have this nice deformed logo that looks like, I don't know, a sphere or orange peel. Anyway, let me go and hide these. And basically, this is going to be the initial shape. And when we turn these off and look at it from the final position of our camera, we're going to have our final logo reveal. Excellent. So the main structure of our setup is ready. Now we have to do all the other stuff that makes it look beautiful. First and foremost, let's go and create the animation, the camera and the deformer animation. So I'm going to activate my camera, go to the final view, and you can see that we get no animation at this point. I'm going to go to frame 120 and set these deformations to 0, and then I'm going to go to frame 0 and set them to the initial value. Let's begin with the latter. So select them both, make sure you're in Object tab, and go to the Strength and just add a keyframe. Now let's go to frame 120, and let's go and set this to 0, and it's all unfolded. Press to add a keyframe, and now we have this unfolding in 120 frames. Fantastic. Now, to be honest, I don't want it to start unfolding from the beginning. I want this to rotate a couple of times and start unfolding, let's say from frame 60. Essentially, I need to move these keyframes to frame 60. The best way to do that is to go to the timeline dope sheet, make sure that the automatic is on so you can see everything that's animated. And I need to go to these two keyframes, and you can see that here we get the attributes. And from frame 0, just set this to 60, press enter, and that's all you have to do. You can always drag them if you wish. So now we get nothing, 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 and then unfolding for 60 frames, and that's pretty much it. Now, I want this to rotate nicely, but if you go to the top view, what you will see is that the actual null over here is not at its center. And what I could do is create a null and eyeball it, put it here, and I think it's the center, and it will work perfectly. But I like to use another method, which is even more accurate. In the top view, go and create a circle. And what I'd like you to do is place it roughly where you want it to be. Then scale it up to the point where it actually starts touching the edges of your object, somewhere around there. And then just adjust its position so that it looks that it occupies nicely most of the object. And this is now a very good center. It's nearly perfect. So let's call this rotator. And this will be the overall parent of the whole model. So if I select the rotator, and if I go to my 3D view, you will see that if I rotate this, it rotates nicely without any distortions or anything else. Let's go and add that rotation in. And the way I'm going to do it is go to the rotator, go to the coordinates, and so you can see it's the R rotation. So set it to 0 for now. And at frame 120, when this opens, I'm going to set another keyframe at 0. Because this is the final frame. Now, what I can do from this point onwards is the following. I'm not going to go to the timeline from here. I'm actually going to right-click here, Animation, and go and show F-curve. And this is going to show me the F-curve of this particular parameter. So now I can go here and say, okay, my final rotation is going to be this. What do I want my initial rotation to be? So just get this keyframe and start raising it up. You can actually do that manually or by increasing the value. So let's go up a bit, and now you will see that it rotates and then it unfolds. I want it to rotate more, so zoom out and move it up. Now it's only 4 degrees. Let's make this 90 degrees. And when you're here, press H to frame everything. So you can see that it's rotating. Now, I don't want this to ease in. I just want it to ease out. So select this and drag this little tangent so that it's pretty much tangential to this over here. So now it has an initial speed, and it just slows down, and then it unfolds. And that's fantastic. Now, if you want to play with the timing, for example, you want to make it go faster, and you put it here, just adjust this. But this is going to cause a problem that before this keyframe, you have no rotation. See that? So that's a very simple thing to solve. Select the actual track and go to the attributes and say before, this black line, before, I don't want it to be a constant value. I want it to continue to project in the direction that the spline is going. So go here and do a continue. So now, just with 2 keyframes, you can control the animation any way you want. And that looks really, really nice. Now, we are going to use this in a second, so let me close it for now, because now I want to set my camera to be close inside this little sphere thingy when we are starting our animation. So at frame 120, I'm going to go to my camera, go to the coordinates, and I'm going to freeze the Z, because I'm not planning to do any other motions on my camera. And I'm going to go to frame 0 now, and I'm going to start going closer. Now, if you want to move faster when you're clicking and dragging the arrows, just press Shift and it goes at a higher speed. So let me set my initial position here. I'm going to adjust these in a bit. So now, as I'm animating moving out, you can see that we go through some geometry. I do not want to do that. And the best way to fix this is just to move your animation a bit. So what I'm going to do is just leave my playhead over here, go back to my timeline, and I need to select my camera animation or my rotation, actually. And you don't see anything because you need to press H. And you can see that my rotation now needs to be adjusted, only the first frame, so that we are avoiding this geometry, whether you want to push it one way or another. So I want it to go the other way. I want it to go to the right. So I'm just pressing my down arrow on my keyboard, and I was going the wrong way around. So let me just move upwards, and I'm just rotating the object. You can see over here that I'm rotating the object, and I'm just moving so I can find a gap. There you go. So now I have a big enough gap for the camera to pass. Just make sure this is pretty tangential here. And now I can start from here, and I can move. And again, we get a bit of the geometry overlapping. Let's go and fix that. Again, select this. Go here. Let's go up. Is that up or is that down now? There you go. Now we go down. And you spend a few minutes just to fine-tune how this is going through. See, now it comes close, but we don't go through it. Coming close is good, because if we add some depth of field on some motion blur, it will look really, really fabulous. So yeah, I like my starting frame, and my ending frame has been untouched because I didn't touch this keyframe at all. So pretty much this finalizes the animation part. There you go. That's my animation. In a separate document, I've actually downloaded some buildings. These are all from the asset browser, the new asset browser, and all you have to do is just type buildings or something and grab a few of those in your scene. It will download and bring them onto your computer. What I've done here is I've arranged them by height. So the shorter ones are at the top and the taller ones are at the bottom. You can have it either way. And that's because I want to control how many buildings I'm going to have in my final setup that are larger and how many are smaller. Usually you have more small buildings and fewer large ones. So I'm going to select them all and just go and copy them. In my main document, and let me maximize my 3D view, I'm going to deactivate my camera so I can see this from a distance, and I'm going to go here so I can see the whole thing unfolded. It helps me deal with what I'm trying to do. Now I'm going to create a cloner, and I want all those buildings I have in my clipboard now to be pasted as children. Now, you can always just paste them and drag them in, or what I like to do is, one of the settings I always change in the preferences is in the interface, I go and set the paste new object at child, which means that if an object is selected, when I paste something, it's going to be a child, and that helps me a lot with my workflow. So let me just paste them in, and they become children. Now, by default, the cloner is set to a grid array. Go to object, so it's a grid array. I want it to be in object mode. I want it to create multi-instances, so it's really, really fast. And I want to clone on the actual extruded object. And you can see that we get a few of these. Now, I want to only grow these, and let me make, let's say, 1,000. I want these to grow, so to speak, only on the front cap. So I'm going to go here, and if you know anything about these modeling generators, if you type capital C in 1 and press enter, use the front cap. And you can always go here to the actual model and go to selections, and you can see them. The shell, which is basically the thickness, and we have start cap, end cap, start bevel, end bevel, and a few edge selections and so forth. I just like to do this manually because all these years I've learned how to do it. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want the distribution not to be on the surface, just to fill the surface. I want it to be on each polygon, so polygon center. And now you can see that we get a lot of buildings on the front, none at the back, and that looks fantastic. But you can see them all lying down. Because the models were pointing upwards in the Y, and MoGraph uses the normals of the object, which are the Z, I just need to rotate them. And all I have to do is go to the Cloner Transform tab and find which rotation I need to change, and I think it's -90 on the P. And now all my objects are actually oriented nicely on my object. And you can see the performance is fantastic, no lags, nothing. Everything works really, really fluidly. Now, I need to add a few more things. For example, I want to control the number of bigger objects and smaller objects. And for that, what I'm going to do is the following. I'm going to create a standard material and have only a color, and I'm going to call this shader. And I'm going to go here and add a noise and leave it as is for the time being. Now, as far as the cloner is concerned, I'm going to go to the MoGraph and go and find a shader effector. And this shader effector now is just affecting the scale. I don't want to affect the scale. What I want to do is affect the clone. So if I set this to modify clone, you can see that now all of these are the same building. Now, there's one thing we need to do. We need to go to the cloner if we're going to use the modify clone and set the actual clones to sort mode. And this will allow the shader itself to control which of the clones are going to be used at any given time. And that's really cool. But now I want to randomize them. So to randomize them, because we're using this shader effect, I'm just going to bring it closer so I travel less with the mouse. You go to the shading, and I'm going to use this material over here, which I'm going to apply to my model. And I'm going to go to the shader and say, what channel do we want? And that was the color channel. So go to the shader and say, I want the color channel of this material. So now the noise in here is controlling the randomization. So if I go here and I change the scaling and stuff like that. Now there's one little detail you need to be very, very careful with, because watch this. When I start deforming this, these buildings are creating chaos. They're changing. And that's because the noise currently is sampling the world. Anyway, that's a detail. Just go to the noise itself and change the space to UV2D. And this will fix this noise on the surface it's getting the information from. So now, because the surface is deforming and the information is coming from the surface, no changes are going to happen. So let's go and change the noise to something like Luca. And I can always go and change the scale of this noise. Or another thing I can do is change the values here. So we get more of the smaller buildings, and I can change the brightness. You can see what's going on here. Brightness and contrast. And this is going to allow us to define how many of the smaller or bigger objects we are going to get. Excellent. And this seems okay. You can play around with the scale a bit to create a bit more chaos and randomization, and just play around with these to control this and art direct it the way you want. Now this looks nice and good, but it's too regular. You can see everything is 90 degrees. So all I want to do is go to the cloner, add a random effector, and set the parameter to be rotation, rotate the H, and now we're rotating these and breaking up that uniformity. I don't care if I have overlaps. That's part of the artistic vision I have. Excellent. So there you have it. Now let's check and see if everything sticks in place. You can see none of the buildings are flipping or changing. Maybe another type of view will allow you to do that. And there you go. Look at that. A city on a logo. Fantastic. Let's now move on to the texturing and shading. Let's begin by changing my interface. I have a Redshift user interface, which is nothing more than the render view docked over here, and it has a previous render, so don't worry about that. And what I like to do is start with a dome light, and this already gives us a very good result. Turn off the background, and let's go to our asset browser, and let's type HDR, and let's go and pick one. I like this industrial thing. Drag it here. It's going to ask you a question. I'm going to say no. It's going to download, and it's going to install it in your folder if you wish to do that. Fantastic. So now we have this kind of colorization. Now let's go and make some room here so we can move around, and let's go and add some colors. So I'm going to create a Redshift material. I'm going to go and apply it to the Dell model. So now that's the actual material, and that is going to be the overall color. So I'm going to double click here. I'm going to select from my swatches, which I've got the Dell color, and this is going to go nice and blue, and I'm going to make a copy of this material. I'm going to make it darker, and I'm going to apply it to my clones. So we have a bit of a difference over here. When we go close, you will see we have a difference between the actual color and the buildings, and even make it a bit darker and a bit more saturated. It's up to you to choose what you want. Excellent. I'm going to call this buildings, build, and I'm going to call this logo. Fantastic. Now, let's remember something. When this unfolds here, when this unfolds, the color we're going to see is the inside. But when it's folded, the color we're going to see is the outside. I want the outside to be a bit more interesting. So I'm going to make a copy of this logo. I'm going to call it outside. And I'm going to go and apply it on the Dell model on the C2. So it's going to be on the back. And I'm going to make this a bit darker. I'm going to add a Maxon noise. And that Maxon noise, I'm going to set it to Luca because that's what I like to do. And I'm going to go to my main material in my reflections and grab the roughness and put it here and connect it to the roughness. So now we're going to get a nice little roughness noise. And in the Maxon noise, I can always go and make it a bit bigger so I can see it bigger. Good. Let's activate the camera and make sure that this is set to the main camera. And let's go and see how this looks when we pull out here. You can see this is how it looks. Go to the outside and let's make the actual color a bit darker and a bit more saturated as well, just because it looks more interesting. Good. I think I like that. And that's all we're going to do for the outside. Now I want this inner shell to have a lightness, to have an emission. So let's create a new redshift material. And I'm going to go and call this orange. And I'm going to apply it here. And if you go here, you will see that the selection is the shell. So select this and type S, press enter. You can see it's only applied here. And let's go over to this, select the material, deactivate the diffuse, and go to the overall and set the emission to 2 and the emission color to a nice orange of your liking. And there you go. We have that. So excellent, excellent. So that's our lighting, and it unfolds and it looks really nice. We are going to do one more thing when we get to the end. Let's add a few more lights now to make it a bit more interesting. I'm going to go to Redshift Lights and add an area light. I'm going to right click and add a target and target the rotator. So now if I go here and pull that light out, you can see it always faces the center of this. I need to make it quite large, so drag those orange dots and make it larger, and you can always go to the light itself down here, and let's set this to, let's say, 5,000. I'm going to get the multiply the intensity down, and let's add some volume in the atmosphere, so redshift objects, and let's go to the redshift environment, and this is the environment itself. You can see it allows for scattering, and go to the light if you want it to scatter volume, and go to the volume tab and just increase this number ever so slightly. And you can see it's massive here. So you can go to the redshift environment and bring the scattering down, and this will make it a bit more discrete. Now let's go to this area light and let's give it a nice little color, sort of a bluish color. Nice. Make sure that the light itself is not visible in your frame, because otherwise you're going to get this weird halo. So pull it back so it goes outside the frame, or just move it to the side and just adjust it, maybe make it a bit smaller like that. There you go. And you can adjust the light's intensity if you want it to have more influence on your noise, on your volume, or just go and increase this by a few fractions. And let's make another light. Let's send it all the way to the other side. Let's set the other light to a color of orange, and we have a nice little setup here, nicely, beautifully lit. So rewind. You can see here are our objects. Maybe the buildings are a bit too shiny, so go here, go to the base properties, go to the reflection roughness and increase the roughness. And of course you can do this here next to your render view so you see exactly what's going on. And yeah, I like that. And we need to add one more aspect to this. When the logo finally lands in its position, I want to get rid of all the buildings. So let's go to the cloner. Let's go to MoGraph Plane Effector. Let's turn off the position and activate the scaling and set it to -1. And I think my volume is too intense, but I don't really care at this moment. Now, if you go to the fall off and add a linear field, this linear field, and providing it's a bit bigger, maybe 600, can control the scaling of these buildings. Excellent. So I'm going to move this to the side, and better do it in the front view. I'm going to go here and move this linear field to the side, so it's outside the influence of the logo. I'm going to go to the actual field and go to the coordinates. And I've been moving the plane, so I'm just going to set the field to be at 0. Then for the next few frames, I'm going to sweep it over so that it removes all the buildings and go and add a keyframe. So now we have the buildings, we land, and then the linear field is going to remove them. And that is basically the animation done. And the textures and the volumes, again, I may need to go to my volume scattering and set this to 1 just to make it a bit more discrete. And the way I rendered this was I went to my render settings. I have my own settings already saved here. The redshift attributes have been simplified quite a bit. So in this particular case, I'm just going to turn on my motion blur and add deformation blur as well. And that's pretty much it. And that's what I can do in 30 minutes. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I want to thank Dell for hosting me. And yes, good luck with all your projects.